Only 4% of creators make over $100,000 a year. 96% of creators making less than 6 figures a year.
If you're a marketer wondering what's next in influencer marketing, this conversation with Jennifer Quigley Jones, CEO and founder of Digital Voices, is one you really, really don't want to miss.
If you just go and work with the Mr. Beast or the Alex Ells or the KSIs, if you're working with the people who are constantly that celebrity mega talent at the top, you're not really democratising your marketing dollars, are you?
She shares the real economics behind the creator economy and why influencer marketing is about democratising marketing budgets, not just chasing reach.
I was really scared of failure, and I think being an entrepreneur is putting yourself in the line of failing all the time. No matter how well you do, you're going to fail at something. Someone's going to think you're not doing enough.
With highlights into how her team is building a new kind of results-driven, people-first agency from the ground up.
Culture happens on social media now first, and then resonates across real life, across other forms of media.
It's thoughtful, sharp, and essential listening for anyone serious about where marketing is heading.
If you want to grow your career fast and you're young, there are 2 different routes you can take. The first is if you're someone who
So today's episode is of course brought to you by 2 fantastic organisations. The first, Studio Space, a leading on-demand marketing agency platform. This enables marketers to browse and brief agencies, receive proposals and start work all in one place. It's literally like having your own agency network at your fingertips, without the hassle, as they take care of everything from contracting, invoicing, procurement to legal. So check out Studio Space today. Our other sponsor, of course, is the Marketing Skills Trust, a charity whose mission is to make the marketing industry a better place, providing grants to help create a more equitable industry and help us to level up. The Marketing Skills Trust has been instrumental in championing a more inclusive, diverse and open marketing industry. You can find out more by going to their website. Okay, let's get on with the show.
Jen, look, it's amazing to have you on here today. We've been waiting for a good couple of months to get you on. You've been traversing the world and you've just got back from a trip from Bali as well. But let's talk shop. Now, you have created and run one of the UK's most successful and fastest growing influencer marketing agencies, which is just super cool. But beyond all the hype, beyond all the metrics and the performance around and the growth of influencer, could you tell me perhaps what is the core truth that leads us to think about how influence really works in today's context?
Thank you. That's, start with a small question.
Yeah, we ease you in gently. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think there are a couple of things I'd like to cover in this. The first one is I think the transition is that culture happens on social media now first and then resonates across real life, across other forms of media. So you'll notice there are TikTok trends that get onto Reels 3 weeks, a month later, but then they end up in The Tonight Show. They end up really transitioning and becoming part of culture, but it starts often on these short form content platforms. And I think influencers have such a role to play in creating culture now. And I think that's what brands haven't fully grasped. I think they've realised digital's overtaken television. They've realised that they, shouldn't be investing as much in print or radio or TV. But I think some senior marketers haven't really realised how much power, influence and independence they need to give to more junior members of their team to create that content that is truly going to resonate. And I think they often think, social media is an afterthought, so I'll just hire an intern or hire someone young to do it. But that is the interface where most people will learn who your brand is. That's the interface where your brand will then resonate across different aspects of culture. So if you're keeping it an afterthought, you're going to risk becoming irrelevant. But also if you're not giving that team enough authority to really experiment and to really fail without blame, you miss a huge opportunity to learn what your brand needs to be in culture and what it needs to represent. So you can see this with Duolingo. I think everyone talks about Duolingo, but the fascinating part of it to me is because we worked with them. And the fascinating thing was they said, our customers are kind of siloed into 2 groups. You've got the people who have really long, thousands of days Duolingo streaks, who see Duolingo like Sudoku, like a way of staving off dementia. They have a lot of older people who see it as like a mental quiz. So they might be learning Spanish, but they're not really learning Spanish to learn Spanish. So they have this segment, like a power user segment that are aged over 60 who use Duolingo in this very traditional, safe way. And we don't think about that side of Duolingo. So they have that customer group, and they were like, not being too brazen about it, they're like, that customer group is going to die at some point, right? So what do you do to capture the next generation? And that's why they thought, okay, TikTok can be completely for Gen Z. There is no way our 60 plus customers are going to interact with the whatever we do on TikTok, so we can protect the brand for them by keeping it as a consistent brand experience, and then do something crazy on TikTok to try and win Gen Z's hearts and minds and try and get them to use, so that we've future-proofed the brand. And I think people never think of it that way. They think, oh, Duolingo is just doing crazy stuff, and they forget that it was partly a long-term brand survival mechanism. They also have been really good at creating a culture where there's no blame, there's no fear. If you try something that doesn't work, you're not going to get fired. And so again, I think that's where senior marketers, if you don't create that environment, you're not allowing your social team to really test things. You're not allowing them to decide what your brand will be in the next 10 years. And you're doing yourself a real disservice.
I think Duolingo is a fantastic example, by the way. I mean, beyond what we see on socials, the company has skyrocketed, even in recent years. I mean, it took a long tail to actually get to profitability, but now that it has, and even with the recent announcements around AI, it's really a great example of forward thinking. And what you've articulated there about future proofing just kind of really resonates in terms of how they think about their strategy. So it's a really good one to have gone after.
Oh, thank you.
Well, right there, we've got to get Emmanuel from Duolingo on the show. So, what have we been doing? That's a big bang start, because we're really getting into the anthropology of marketing as a function. And you said that culture is created in social media. I mean, it shouldn't be really hard for brands to realise that that's happening, because in their own lives. But what do you think it is? Maybe I'm asking you to step into the psychology of the CMO. That's stopping them realising. It seems obvious. Realising, is it a power thing? Is it a naivety thing? Is it a stakeholder management thing to really unleash the youth of their teams to be the top of funnel function?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting with CMOs because it's a position that is inherently precarious.
Yeah.
And then I think there's also a huge shift with kind of cost cutting on brands, and then also a lot of brands are cutting the CMO role entirely. I think last year, I saw this on TikTok, Charlotte Mayer, who was a great agency speaker, she was saying 74% of brands had a CMO last year, and now it's gone down to 66% this year. Wow. So the CMO, I think, role is also under threat. So people are, I think, scared. Like the tenure was, already short. I think it's on average like 4 years, the tenure of a CMO. But I think you worry you're going to take risks, especially in a tough economic climate, or you're going to say the wrong things, where DEI was in vogue and now DEI is cancelled. So it's like you don't know really where you're allowed to let people play and what the lines are. And I think some CMOs are probably just slightly scared about the precariousness of their role, and also the struggles in measuring the results from influencer and social, which is interesting because in my eyes it's so much better than out of home or TV or radio. But I think often the people who are the best social thinkers, especially creating this like unhinged content on social media, the nutter butter Duolingo style, they're not the best, or they're not trained, or the agencies aren't supporting them in thinking about measurability and data and incrementality. So I think you've got a really, really strong core part of the future of marketing that cannot advocate for itself in terms of financial and data terms. So I think there's a lot of training to be done in thinking about how you measure it, how you include it in even like influence marketing. It's ridiculous. It's obviously MMM is like the core way of most brands measuring the success of their marketing. But 80% of brands that use MMM do not include influencer in it. So we're like, okay, so Unilever CEO is saying that we should be spending 50% of marketing budgets on social and influencer. But if that budget isn't integrated in the measurement solution, how can you ever justify increasing that budget? Yeah. So I think there's a real, I think for CMOs, it's a really hard challenge, because how do you truly measure and advocate for something where you're speaking different languages?
They're just, I met an agency, Ecometrics, who nobody's ever heard of in marketing effectiveness, and they absolutely integrate social into MMM. So maybe this is what's going to be a bit of an unlocker for CMOs. So you mentioned about DEI, and clearly, you know, things are changing pretty fast. To what extent is the creator economy different? Is it different in this dynamic?
The thing I think that's interesting about influencer marketing is it's inherently about communities and inherently about speaking to and tailoring your message to a community that deeply feel like you understand them. So some of the campaigns we've run, we'll have different influencer briefs for different verticals. So one of the best converting verticals we've worked with this tech company is drag queen creators. We're not working with them to tick a box. We're working with them because they are incredible at driving sales on YouTube. So we have a specific brief tailored to drag queen creator talking points, how they've driven sales. And I think that's where influencer marketing still has the power of personalizing and localizing content. It's so inherent to influencers because they are micro entrepreneurs themselves. They are living in different places. Like Unilever CEO said he wanted influencers in every single postcode in India, right? And that's because they can speak to a local experience. Exactly. That isn't technically DEI because you're not working with them to tick a box. Actually, what you're working with them to do is to make sure a product and a brand messaging really resonates locally or resonates with the community of people who follow them. Yeah. So I think influencer marketing is inherently quite a democratic model of marketing. The money you spend goes to micro entrepreneurs. It doesn't go to necessarily just Meta or Google or TikTok. It goes to these small business owners who have a very deep parasocial relationship with their audience. So I don't think DEI is dead in influencer marketing because I think it's an evolution of maybe what DEI was always meant to be. So maybe we're changing the phrases, but I still think hyperlocalization, personalization, and community are core to this type of marketing, and I hope it won't change. Thank you.
That's a cracking answer.
I love it, and I love the thought of its enabling democratization, and it's enabling people to live the way that they want to and have the freedoms that they want to in a way that it could never have happened before. And I mean, just for a moment though, there are these outcomes of mega influencers beyond the community elements who of them in themselves become cultural icons. You know, Mr. Beast, of course, is the classic, the Sidemen, KSI, all those sort of people in the mix. And what they are now doing is commercializing and having real commercial ventures that sit behind their influence or what they've done across socials. And I wonder, do you see a changing or evolving business model taking shape as a consequence of the eruption of these mega influencers in the market? Yes.
Okay, you've raised so many things. There's a whole development in the creator economy, and I think there's also like an inequality in the creator economy that people don't talk about. So I'll cover the inequality point first, then we can go to this huge shift. So Goldman Sachs did a study with eMarketer, and they found that only 4% of creators make over $100,000 a year. So everyone sees influencers and think, oh, they're getting paid loads of money, they can drive around their Lamborghinis, who are they? They're not who I followed. What?
No hope.
It's true for a few of them. But most creators, then 96% of creators making less than six figures a year and that's six figures in dollars. So it means you're going to end up essentially relying on brand deals, because 70% of that income comes from brand deals, to basically subsidize you producing content. So what's really interesting for brands in the creator economy is if you know the reason these creators can survive isn't from ad revenue, it's from you choosing to spend your marketing dollars with them.
Yes.
You are essentially enabling who is allowed to make content for culture. You're enabling, as a marketer, it's the first time you've not just been able to create an ad campaign that people remember, but you are literally empowering who can economically afford to continue to produce content. Because if you think about being a full-time content creator, it's really hard, right?
It's hard work, yeah.
So every time, say you work with a single mom in Arkansas who can now start a business from home and film content with her kids, you're giving her maybe one brand deal a month. You might pay her $2,000 to promote a yogurt brand, but she can then produce content for the whole month for her community for free. And so I think there's a real a brand and marketers have to have this real sense of purpose. It's a real privilege to think that you are creating economies, right? It's a privilege to think you are funding the voices that then shape how people feel seen online. It's a crazy responsibility that I don't think people think about. Yeah. And also on that economic inequality piece, if you just go and work with the Mr. Beast or the Alex Earls or the KSIs, if you're working with the people who are constantly that celebrity mega talent at the top, you're not really democratizing your marketing dollars, are you? Like you're working with one person who might resonate with one audience, but also if they're really large, if you run a campaign with one of these people, they'll resonate with some people on a shallow level. But it's not like you're working with a small creator who has a really deep connection because they're super passionate about Dungeons and Dragons and their audience tune in every day to watch them make a sandwich inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's a very different depth of parasocial relationship. So I think a lot of brands are approaching this in terms of, we can just replace a celebrity with an influencer. Tick box, we've done influencer marketing. But actually what you're doing is perpetuating this cycle where those people already have millions. Like Mr. Beast will make $3 million per video, per 60-second YouTube sponsorship. And it's great. I actually think he's worth it, and he gets the views to justify it. But that's not helping the smaller creators who really need that money. It's also not democratizing to speak to different communities in your customer base in one campaign. So I think there's brands need to think about this inequality issue. Don't think influencers are all the same. They're all making loads of money. Let's tick a box. Then the point you've made on products and influencers' businesses, I think, is really interesting. Again, it's still kind of contained with the macros and some of the celebrities at the moment, like Emma Chamberlain Coffee, Feastables and Mr. Beast. I mean, Sidemen released a vodka recently. Yeah. Hilarious. But that is really shaping the way business is being done and products being designed. So the feedback loop from social media is incredible, because there's a huge trend for founder-led brands, but also when you release a product, people can give you feedback immediately, or you can involve them in the building process. So customers want to feel involved. They want to build that loyalty, right? So Amy Smell from Odd Muse, she will give previews of dresses that she's built for Odd Muse. She'll be like, oh, this is one that didn't make the cut. And the audience then get very involved in that process and feel like they were part of not just customers, they were part of the product development cycle. And I think influencers are really natural at doing that at scale. So Emma Chamberlain did a video recently tasting all the coffees they've released as part of Chamberlain Coffee, and she'll be like, oh, or she'll make a video of herself tasting all of the pastries that they're debating whether they put in the store. And so the audience, again, they feel like they're involved in that selection process. So I think that's a huge benefit for influencer, and it lets them focus group test without having to spend a lot of money.
But do you think there's a threat to the sort of the big corporate brands that have existed for yonks vis-a-vis these sort of mega influencer brands that are now popping up? Do you see those sort of challenging the status quo?
I think there's a challenge, but I think there's also an opportunity, which is really cheesy. But there are so many brands that could be involving influencers in product creation. They're not. So it's really interesting. We're doing a campaign with a CPG brand at the moment where they know they're developing a new product. So it's actually a sexually linked product in Germany. It's a condom brand, there you go. And they want to get influencers' feedback on the way it's marketed. So we're not just involving them saying, here's the product, produce content. We're saying, hey, how would you consider marketing this product? What would your approach be? How do you want to critique the strategy? So I think there's space to involve influencers in critiquing marketing strategy, but also in critiquing product development or partnering to produce products. So a lot of creators might not want to launch their own brand because Feastables is a huge, expensive venture. But could you partner with Stanley to produce a custom Stanley cup? Actually, that's an easier solution. So I think there is a huge opportunity for brands to actually potentially have like an incubator fund where they involve influencers in product development. There could be like, Michael Jordan style percentage. That's fine. Licensing fee.
He did well.
Yeah, he did really well. So maybe, and of course there'll be some that fail. There'll be some influencers that don't. There'll also be some really unexpected successes. But I think there's potential for a large CPG brands to harness the power of influencers rather than seeing it as a threat. All these creators aren't going to create their own brands, but they would love to lean in and get involved. Like Alex Earl and Poppy. She invested in Poppy and that's been acquired by Pepsi. So I think there's an interesting way that they can harness that power.
Very interesting. So who's going to be the brave CMOs that step into this more forcefully? Very interesting point about the sort of responsibility, if not burden, of creating culture. And actually, I remember when we had Sir John Hegarty on, he talked about the Levi's ad and exiting from punk and almost sort of a catalyst point for a new era of trends and fashion and culture. So maybe the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's still the case that marketing has a role in play in terms of defining culture. So Jen, you've built something amazing, and we've gone deep into the concept. We'll revert back to that. But just tell us a little bit about what was the ignition point? What was the spark that got you started?
Yeah, so my career has been quite strange. So I did Middle Eastern studies for my master's at Harvard on a scholarship. So I learned Arabic every day, and I worked with Syrian refugees. So I spent a lot of time in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan. I did some work on Iraq with the UN. And then after that, I worked at Oxfam briefly, and I felt like I wasn't learning. I think I'm a very impatient person, which, strength and weakness at the same time. And I'm really motivated by learning. And I think the international development space tends to move quite slowly. And so I thought, okay, if I really wanted to make the most out of growing my career quickly, what should I do? And so I read an article in The Economist that was like, if you want to grow your career fast and you're young, there are two different routes you can take. The first is if you're someone who is a very well-rounded person, very likable, on sports teams, got about a 2-1 at university. If you're like a box tick, good, normal person, go to management consultancy. Then it was like, if you're quirky, if you like hyper-focus on topics, if you might, just be quite different, you should go to tech. So I randomly was working at Oxfam at the time, and applied for Google. I applied for a job at YouTube, actually on the Middle Eastern team. So as a partner manager to help, basically the role of the strategic partner manager is to help YouTube creators grow their audience, because when they make more money from ad revenue, so does YouTube. So YouTube had this really, and still has it, it's a slightly smaller team now, but has this really interesting team where your job is to like coach creators. The only YouTube work I'd done before then was documenting Syrian child torture on YouTube. Like, it was really dark, but I was like, oh, I'll try this. Like, Saudi women drivers was sparked by a video uploaded to YouTube. I was like, I've, learned Arabic. And they interviewed me for an hour in Arabic, and they were like, your Arabic's good, but it's literally also no camera, so just on the phone, which was quite a stressful experience. And they were like, your Arabic's good, but you're not fluent in multiple dialects. I was like, no, I'm not. I would love to be. I was like, I'm not. And I think it would take a while for me to get there. And so instead they said, we have a role we're not advertising on the UK team, because every other role requires multiple fluent languages. The UK team, we know as soon as if we post this role, we're going to get inundated. But would you consider taking it? So I worked at YouTube for about 2 years, worked with creators just from all different industry, gamers, The Economist as a creator, which was really funny because they sparked the move. UNHCR were one of the creators I worked with, like prank channels, makeup channels, everything. And then again, 2 years in, I was like, oh, I think I've stopped learning. Like, I loved Google. It shaped so much of my thinking. But I think the PR around Google is that you're going to basically go to a startup, but actually it was like a 120,000 person company at the time. So I felt a bit like a small cog in a big machine. So I thought there was a gap for anyone who knew how to work with YouTube creators, because everyone who was doing influencer marketing, this is 10 years ago, 8 years ago I officially started the company, was doing Instagram or Facebook. So I was like, I think there's a gap for YouTube, and YouTube's where a lot of the sales and performance is being driven. I handed in my notice, didn't really know what I was going to do next. I put £500 into a business bank account and started freelancing. And the thing that I look back at it, I think I had 10 grand in savings, and I was like, I'm going to be fine forever. What an idiot, living in London, 10 grand in savings, 500 quid in your company. Like, that was, I didn't, come from a privileged background. My family thought being an entrepreneur was insane. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I'd never worked in marketing, because technically I'd worked in YouTube, but I hadn't worked in marketing. I'd never managed anyone. I'd never worked in an agency. And then I freelanced for 9 months, hated it, and decided I'd create an agency. Because when you freelance, you're only allowed to do either the strategy or the execution. You're never trusted for a whole campaign. And I thought, I'm not getting much satisfaction from this.
Just do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, hairs on the back of my neck hearing your story. I mean, you just Harvard MBA. You talked about curiosity. You talked about impatience. Clearly driven. and you said not from a privileged background, and maybe this is the answer, but where do you think that tiger in you comes from?
I think most entrepreneurship comes from a really broken place. It's interesting. I think like most successful entrepreneurs aren't the happiest people. I don't know. This is interesting. I think I always felt like I love my parents and they're phenomenal parents, but it was always work harder, not smarter. So it was always like, I have a lot of South Asian friends who are like, your upbringing was like mine, like rip up the homework if it wasn't good enough, you know? So I think I always put pressure on myself to just exceed every goal. Yeah, I don't know. I think I love challenging myself. I love learning things. I was really scared of failure. And I think being an entrepreneur is putting yourself in the line of failing all the time. No matter how well you do, you're going to fail at something. Someone's going to think you're not doing enough, or someone will think you, I don't know, could have done better, or you could have won a pitch. And I think I'm kind of addicted to the being on the edge of failing thing. I also think the advertising industry to me is very ripe for change. I think there are lots of issues that the Me Too movement raised that when we just stopped talking about. And I think if you can create a culture where people feel, no matter which background they come from, they feel respected for their ideas, they feel like they have a place where they're not going to be undermined. That's what I try to create, Digital Voices. I think you can create, the legacy can be like, if your team go and lead the industry, they'll make it better. So I definitely think in advertising, it's kind of still ripe for a shake-up in terms of like economic class and access, in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of ability and like neurodiversity. I've hired some people who like a lot of my C-suite have never run departments before. They've never been C-suite before. Yeah. And they are so accountable and so empathetic. And the industries they've come from, especially if they've come from the traditional holdcos, they're like, there's no politics here. There's no ego. There's no it's about doing the work as a team and doing it really well. And so I'd quite like building a culture where people feel respected for their opinions, and like they can drive real value. And so I think that's where influencer marketing, again, the ideas come from all these democratized creators, but again, within our team as well, we try and have that. And it means a lot to me to build an agency where people aren't going to be taken advantage of.
That's amazing because, you know, the reality is the holdco environment, and we're hearing about Group M and WPP, and, you know, this is a really tough time for the traditional agency, and, you know, what's going to be, let's just 5 years time, what might be?
It's really interesting because I think a lot of the holdcos are trying to solve the problem they have of innovation, of structuring thinking differently by acquiring, and then they acquire agencies and the founders leave quickly because they hate the experience.
Yeah, that's been known.
Happened a few times. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that challenges some of the traditional holdco models, and whether they're going to create space for the founders they bring in to really shape culture internally, or to even shape the way their economic models work. We have a very similar, we have like guaranteed results for our campaigns. So we try and really align all of our interests with our clients, and that can be guaranteed in terms of awareness upper funnel, or it can be guarantees in terms of lower funnel, which is really hard to do, but it means we're literally putting our agency fee on the line to get to our clients' KPIs, which is kind of terrifying. But I do worry if we ever ended up in a holdco, would they try and cut that model as the first thing that goes? And so publicists have talked about outcomes-based and doing lots on outcomes-based work at the moment. It's not just culturally internally and maintaining innovators internally who are not driven by ego, who are driven by doing exciting work and like breaking that hierarchy. But I think it's also potentially being willing to risk the business models that they're built on, to think about how advertising can serve the clients better.
We'll see.
I don't know if it'll work, yeah.
We'll see, indeed. Jen, I tell you, I mean, some of the things you're saying are incredibly profound, but also incredibly insightful. And just to touch on your previous answer about the role of entrepreneurship, I mean, a lot of entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily come from a happy place. That was just really interesting, intriguing, and resonant in some respects. The South Asian thing was quite interesting, as you described it too, by the way, being half Indian. I kind of go, cha-ching. Yeah, wait a minute. I got that one. The other thing that you said was living on the cusp of that ambiguity and almost fear driving the equation in some respects. It's so interesting you say that, because I've been dwelling on that thought for a little while. And actually, as linear careers are becoming more, let's call them squiggly, flexible, or need to be more squiggly, flexible, and agile, I think people really need to get more comfortable with that thought of fear, ambiguity, and the cusp of that in their lives. That was really interesting. And the final part was, I just kind of went, oh, it must be a really happy place for you to work at Digital Voices. That must be great. I hope so. I'm sure it's the case. The question I had for you though was, you said you had 9 months of freelancing. The obvious answer about that, and I speak to entrepreneurs all the time, I'm sure you do the same, Mark, about, people maybe have done corporate gigs and then decided that they wanted to do something a bit different. But my instinct after 9 months of hating the role as a freelancer would be, actually, let me try and get another big gig somewhere back in my old land or my own ranch. And you didn't do that. Actually, you thought, no, let me go in bigger and scale bigger and do something completely different. And I just want to get your little thought about that motivation behind that, and maybe why was the reason why, rather than kind of going back, you decided, no, I'm going to go forward, but like 10 steps faster or whatever it was.
So there's so much we can discuss. I don't know. I think I think freelancing and consulting can be great for so many people. I think it partly depends on the stage of life you're at. So I was a 26-year-old woman who came across as, I think I do still come across, hopefully I try to come across as quite naive and trusting, because I think that's how you get the best out of people. And there's so much benefit from that. And the people who take advantage of it, you can walk away and you can make an informed decision. But the good you get from being a trusting person, I think far outweighs any time you're taken advantage of. But as a 26-year-old, I think if you who didn't really know her value. So I think Gen Z now are such stronger freelancers. And actually, that's what I worry. If I lose a team member, I don't think, oh, I'm worried they'll go to a competitor. I think, oh, what if they freelance? Like, they'll make more money, potentially. Why would they not? I think Gen Z are better at having those boundaries for themselves, probably, than I was. I was too much of a people pleaser. And I think if you start consulting and freelancing when you're maybe in your late 30s or 40s, you have more seniority and more gravitas, so people listen to you. Whereas I ended up in a situation where it was just like, I think I was working for this like tea shop startup, paid £800 a month to post twice a day on their Instagram, do all community management, all influencers coming to the tea shop for free, produce all content. I had to learn to do photography and edit. And every month they would tell me, they try and pay my invoice late, or they'd tell me I wasn't worth it, or I was doing all the strategy, and I was like, God, I worked at Google and went to Harvard, and I'm being told I'm not worth £800 a month. I was like, wow, this is a real, I was like, I don't really know if I want to be treated like that. So I think I loved the independence and the being able to craft things, but I didn't necessarily love doing it with startups or with startups that weren't venture backed. I remember there was, again, one startup I worked with, and the guy was gambling on crypto every night to try and pay my invoice. Like, his company wasn't making money, so he knew he wanted it to do well. And I went to his house and met his family, and I was like, oh my God, like, I feel so responsible for this person's success or failure. And then Rolls-Royce Jet Engines approached us in partnership with the RAF for a crazy piece of work to build a YouTube channel to get young people interested in space for the RAF centenary celebration. And that included production, influencers, and the budgets were bigger. And so when that happened, I was like, I don't dislike my work. What I dislike is the way I'm being treated. What I dislike is not having a team that can execute bigger ideas for me. I actually loved training people. I loved like the thrill of getting to find this fit with clients and what they want and what you can provide, like unearthing knowledge gaps, which I think still exist 8 years later. That I loved. And so the idea of going back to a big corporate, or even someone asked me to be co-CEO of a startup, and someone I was seeing at the time sat me down and was like, Jenny, do you believe that person is smarter than you are? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, if you're considering giving up running your own business for someone else's vision, just honestly, do you think she's smarter than you are? And I was like, no. He was like, do you think she's going to solve the business problem? It was stock images. She was like, do you think she's going to solve that problem better than you? And I was like, no, I think the problem I'm solving is more interesting. And he was like, then why would you go and work with someone else? And my parents were like, you could be paid 120 grand salary to be a co-CEO. Like, they were like, you could buy an apartment. They were like, Jenny, it's not too late to retrain to be a lawyer, all this stuff. And I was like, no, actually, I think this is the first time I'm going to really bet on myself. And I think people are nervous about that, especially in the UK. People are nervous to bet on themselves. But then being a young woman, taking that bet on yourself. No one had ever said to me, do you think you're smart? Like, how smart do you think you are? Do you think you can do it?
They were great coaching questions.
Yeah. Should have had a coach rather than dating this person, probably.
Well, there you go. I don't know if you're more...
I need to pay for the therapy afterwards anyway.
Yeah,
so.
there you go. Full circle. I think there was another moment there when you talked about the daylight robbery of £800 a month, and it feels like maybe that was perhaps the pivot moment of like, here's the impact I can have, and I'm basically being ripped off. But then you also talked about trust and naivety, and I'm clinging back to what you said about how I built a leadership team, people who previously hadn't been CEOs. So let's step into Jen as leader. How do you create the conditions for success for people to really thrive and create the culture and all of that? So we've not really touched on that. You as leader.
A lot of reading. I hadn't invested in coaching a lot because I felt like if I could read the books, that would be fine. I was always trying to, when you're bootstrapping, building a company, you're always trying to think about where you can save and how you can innovate and where you can allocate the best resources. So it's like, oh, I'd rather that go on a salary than a coach. But I do a lot of reading on culture. So like the Netflix No Rules book, I loved. Shoe Dog, so good. And then there's a really good book called The High Growth Handbook, which is all about taking companies from a team of 10 to 10,000, and it has all these interesting snippets from different CEOs, COOs, CTOs, and like interviews about how they build companies and how they build structures and how they build sales teams. It's like a bit of a Bible. So I've loved that. I think you have to start with culture. So we have like 10 principles, but also everyone who is hired, we're like empathy and accountability, and they have to be good at their role. But those two things, if you don't have either of them, you won't be a great team member. And you'll end up, my pet peeve is watching people pass work onto other people or people who play the victim at work. It's like, I will give my team, and I don't find it scary to delegate, I will give my team control. I'll let them learn. I want them to learn. But if you don't appreciate the opportunity, or if you don't kind of want to stretch yourself, I think then you just don't make sense to be in a scale up. My C-suite are great. I mean, all come from very different industries. My CFO has a PhD in physics and qualified at PwC, and then went to defense and then financial services. And so she's a real expert in internationalization and M&A processes. So she came on board partly to educate me on that, because also I'm not an expert. So everyone I hire has to be better than me so it can improve my thinking. It's also like, I'm a solo founder, not a founding team. So there's no like gatekeeping where it's like the 3 founders go and have a discussion in a room and make that decision. I say to people very openly, I'm like, I'm running the company, but you're going to know aspects of how to run the company better than I will. So even if you're like 21, you've just joined the team, I'm like, give us feedback, tell us how we can be better. If you're doing something 10 times that you think you should do once and we should automate, tell us, I will give you the headspace. If you fail so loudly that we don't do it again. Like, no one will get punished for failing. You'll get punished if you don't, no one gets punished. You'll get punished if you don't tell people what's going wrong, if you don't help make the company better. So in the onboarding, it's like, we have hired you, even if you're the most junior person on the team, we have hired you because your mind has something to add to this business. And I need to hear that. Don't be scared of me, whatever. So we have documents on how to field a new idea and that were inspired by Amazon. Like, how do you, if you think something should be better, great, fill in this document, share it with 5 people, get feedback. And if everyone says don't do it and you still want to do it, go ahead. But like, get the feedback first. So it's been really interesting to try and build a culture around that, because I think so many organizations very quickly get hierarchical, but in ways it's not hierarchy and structure and process. I love hierarchy and structure and process. The thing I don't like about hierarchical organizations are when they're led by ego. So when it's like, don't question this person at the top. That is where you're going to end up with a death of innovation. It's where you're going to end up with also a death of people feeling like part of the team. If they feel like, oh, Jenny, we're just doing what Jenny says, and Jenny always thinks she's right.
Yeah.
Then
Which
all
is all
will
too
fail.
common.
Yes.
That's very refreshing.
And people often are like, oh, do you get scared to delegate? I'm like, no, I hired smart people. Like, no. I find it really interesting when people are control freaks. Like, I don't need to own all of the pie. I want the pie to be bigger or better. Like, I don't mind paying for people who are great. Like, fine. I want them to go home and be like, oh, I had a great day. I want them to sit. My chief client officer is incredible. She left school at 16 to go work in ad agencies. She was leading the Colgate account for EMEA at Wavemaker at 30. And so she joined, and her husband also is CEO of a data agency. So they, at home, the reason she left WPP to join a smaller agency was because when he left to go to a smaller agency, she was like, oh, I loved our dinner conversations. She's like, oh, that's so much more interesting.
Talking about recruitment process, eh?
I was like,
oh.
And so I was like, oh, so I know every evening they discuss digital voices challenges. I'm like, oh, that's kind of great, because I want more perspective. I want people who go home and they're like, I've been thinking about this business thing. I feel like I own it. Yeah, I mean, I'm fallible. Everyone's fallible. Like, if you think something can be done better, let's try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like, if you only give feedback if you care, because giving feedback is a really awkward conversation. No one wants to criticize people. We're all people pleasers, right? Like, deep down, we want to avoid conflict. So if you're willing to put your hand up and say, hey, I think that was wrong, or I think what you did was wrong, or I think you could have built this process better, it would have saved people's time. You only do that if you care. And it's because you're thinking about things. So that deserves to be rewarded.
Jenny, I love the thought that you talk about, you being on the journey as a scale up. And one of the books you referred to, certainly one of the sub themes were 10 to 10,000. Do you want to create a company that's going from 10 to 10,000? Or what's the vision there?
I would have said, I think a year ago, I probably would have said yes, but there's been a really interesting shift now with AI. This brings us back quite nicely, actually, to like, there's a race now. Who's going to have the first billion-dollar company that's one person in Silicon Valley? So I think even last year I was getting caught up in the vanity metrics of like, how many employees do you have? So we have about 70. We were at one point nearly 100, but I think we weren't structured correctly. And actually, I'd rather have 70 people who can do more work, and we're giving them automation tools and tech and support so they can take on more campaigns at 70 people. I don't think I want to fall into this trap of course, I'd love the company to get bigger, but I want to make sure we're doing the most with the resources we have first. So, yeah, I love scaling it. We run campaigns in like 36 markets. I spend half my time in America. We run campaigns all over Europe. It's really, and that's, I think, going to accelerate. So I love that part of the business, but I want to scale profitably, and I want to scale in a way that keeps people feeling intellectually fulfilled and challenged. And I want to keep learning. So I think, yeah, that's the real motivator for me, rather than like a vanity number.
We sort of keep coming back to ego, but that sounded like a very good balanced scorecard, to keep you grounded. First billion, isn't it? Company
with one person.
A couple of CMIs I know have sort of starting greenfield, build a marketing function, and they're sort of having the conversation with the CFO and CEO saying, at some point I'll hire some humans, but I'll wait until I really need to. AI first. So let's go there. You said something fascinating in the green room conversation around using GPT to keep you curious and challenged every day. Maybe that, and any other tips, because now is the moment. This 2025 is the year where everyone's personally accelerating into the efficiency and effectiveness of the tools, and also the creativity and imagination. So give us that example and any other top tips.
So I think it's really interesting because AI is a trend. A couple of years ago, we had NFTs and blockchain, and it was like, do you invest your time in learning about that or not? Is it flash in the pan? I think AI has proved that it's at this stage where it's not a trend. It is actually like, you do need to invest your time in learning and including it in your business to make it work. So we were writing our OKRs as a company for the financial year, and tech and automation is like key. It's like, we need to really harness the power of technology to do more with fewer resources or similar number of resources. And so I wrote these OKRs, and then I was like, oh, how much am I actually doing this myself? So when I was away, I went on my first 2-week vacation in 8 years. Finally had the headspace to, I think I was not near burnout, but someone told me yesterday the term brownout, which is like a pre-burnout stage where you're not doing rational things. You're getting really fatigued. I left my laptop in an airport. Like that type of silly absent-minded, you lose spatial awareness. It's called brownout. So I think that's where I was. So I had a week off, and then I was like, actually, I should think about AI, and was thinking about how it could be involved in all my processes. So I actually asked ChatGPT, ask me any questions you need to know about my life and tell me, like an AI consultant, how I should be using AI in my life to make things easier. So it came back with a list of questions. And then I answered them all, and it was like, great, you should be using AI for content generation. You should be using AI for thinking and planning and being strategic. You should be using AI for, oh my God, lots of things. Meeting notes, obviously. There were quite a few different instances. And you should also be seeing AI as a teammate, not a tool. You should be seeing it as something you're going to have to invest in making it work better. And so then I said, thank you for this. Like, are there any other questions that you need to ask me that would be helpful for you to know information about me to kind of effectively know how I should use AI? And it came up with loads of other questions and filled them. So every day now, one of the things it's doing is it's giving me a prompt at 8:30 in the morning, which is like a founder prompt. So it can be thinking about marketing and influence marketing. It can be thinking about scaling your business. So today's was, what's something that most marketers misunderstand about influencer marketing? How does that objection often come up? What changes when a client gets it? And so I was thinking about how not all influencer marketing is created equal, and how...
Did GPT know that you were coming on the podcast? I mean, this is a bit...
so interesting. Yeah, I think there's something in choosing to start your day with thinking.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's so easy to kind of drop that from your life. And then the beginning of this year, I did 100 business days of 100 LinkedIn posts. So the issue is video works really well. So again, you're like, oh my God, that's so much time commitment. Yeah. So I used a tool called Poppy AI for that, which you can put in links, you can put in PDFs, you can put in videos, and it will pull transcripts. You can put infographics and it will pull the information, and then it integrates with Claude Sonnet so that it also really copywrites very well. So I would put thought starters in, and it would help me with my content and help me script. So that I couldn't have got through 100 posts in 100 business days without AI.
I'm just going to say that you said something maybe without even realising it, but how to start my day with thinking. There's probably a prompt that we could, if we think that's a good thing, personally I think that's an amazing thing, but if we all think that's a good thing, there's a GPT prompt which is to ask GPT, how do I start my day with thinking? I know there would be loads of reprompting required to get there, but it's a good thought, isn't it?
It's a lovely thought.
That's really good.
An amazing thought. Jen, it's been a fantastic conversation. I mean, we've gone to so many places and spaces throughout, so we're coming up to the end of time here. You've had a fascinating journey, and I think what's even equally remarkable is the thought that I think you've spent time dissecting it and thinking about how things have sort of traversed in the past, and maybe a little bit more about where you're going.
Have a lot of time on planes.
Well, possibly. There you go. And 2 weeks in Bali. Doesn't get better. But I want to ask, I mean, if you were to perhaps look back and tell your younger self just a few things, at perhaps whatever stage of that journey and time you'd like, what would be some of the reflections or insights or advice that you would give that younger Jen about how to move forward?
That's a very good question. I think not being afraid of failure was definitely something that I wish I'd known. So I got divorced really young. So I got married at 23, divorced by 25. 22, married, 22, divorced by 25. We only did a year together. It took 3 years to get divorced. Joyous. So my last year at Harvard, I was living with 30 freshmen in exchange for free accommodation and food, learning Arabic, going back and forth to Lebanon and Jordan all the time. And living with fostered 4 dogs, because of course I fostered dogs, and living with my husband, who we got married in the, you know, so silly, and we broke up straight after that, like a year. So that was, but I was trying to tick so many boxes, I think, really young, and trying to be everything, because I was so scared of failing or not appearing as a success. And I think the times I've been happiest are when I've been like, actually, I'm only accountable to myself. Like, if everyone already thinks you've failed, what would you choose to do? And how would you choose to live your life? And that is something that I wouldn't have started the company without the divorce. So I'm really happy that that's, also, we talked about marketers not being scared of failing. So I think it fits into so many different facets of life. So definitely don't be scared of failing is probably the number one thing. And then also, like, future casting and planning has a value, but it's interesting because you can only really see the red thread in hindsight. So I think for me, it's been really interesting. A lot of the work I did on refugees was about economic integration of refugees. So it was about, okay, could we empower these refugees as entrepreneurs so that they're contributing to the economies they're becoming a part of? And then you end up with, like, actually now I work with entrepreneurs who are changing marketing industry they're a part of that they didn't intend to be in. And so I think, like, hindsight's 20/20, and you can always do that analysis backwards, but don't focus too much on doing it forwards, because the next step in front of you might not make sense, and you won't know it makes sense until you look back. So I think people are so focused on, like, the next title or that narrative. It's like, don't worry too much about that, because it will make sense when you look back. And if it doesn't, at least you've lived an interesting life.
There you go. Wow, amazing. Fabulous to have you on the pod, Jen. I mean, it's truly been a brilliant conversation. Thank you.
I love this. Thank you so much. It's been great. Thank you. Real privilege.